Well, we have huge expertise in our intelligence and security agencies. They monitor for not just risks around terror threats, but also threats from hostile states, from different state actors, different challenges to our UK security, and that's the bread and butter of what they do. They do an extremely good job, and where they raise cases, we take action on them, and we will continue to do so.
Is this a threat that is becoming more grave? However, I mean, the head of MI5 recently said there was a lot of evidence of patient, well-funded and deceptive campaigns, and he did say threats from sabotage and espionage are becoming more serious.
Well, one of the things that the head of MI5 has made clear, and it's certainly something that I have seen in the course of this job, is that the kind of challenges to the UK's security have become much more complex. So you have different patterns of action from China, also more direct threats ranging from cybersecurity or the use of criminal proxies from countries like Russia and from Iran.
What would your message, though, be to the Chinese state? I mean, the Prime Minister met President Xi not so long ago, the first such meeting to take place in a while, but what would your message be to the Chinese state?
Well, we will continue to take a very strong approach to our national security. That includes to any challenge to our national security, including to our economic security, from China, from other countries around the world. That will always be the approach that we will take. Of course, with China, we also need to make sure we have that economic interaction, economic cooperation in place as well. So it's a complex arrangement.
Let's then talk about asylum and why you are here. What are you hoping to achieve during this visit?
Well, this is part of a programme of work that we are determined to take forward to restore order and control both to our borders and also to our asylum and immigration systems. We face the dangerous boat crossings in the Channel, which undermine border security and put lives at risk, and we've been very clear we need to go after the criminal gangs that organise and profit for them. Those gangs operate across borders, and that is why law enforcement and governments need to operate across borders as well. So that's why I'm here talking to the Italian Interior Minister, just as I've been talking earlier in the week to the French, the German, the Belgian and Netherlands Interior Ministers in the Calais group about our stronger cooperation on law enforcement, and why we've got new agreements in place, both with Germany and with the Iraqi government as well.
How can viewers, though, have confidence that that approach is the right one, when actually during your time in charge, the number of boats making that dangerous crossing, putting lives at risk, has increased? And also the number of hotels being used to house people who've come to the UK without permission in the UK, that's gone up too. So why should people think you're taking the right approach?
Well, what we inherited from the first half of this year, the first half of the year had record high levels of boat crossings. Had that continued, we were on track really for the worst year ever for small boat crossings. Had that continued, we would have had many thousands more crossings over the course of the summer and through the autumn. As it is, we're around a quarter lower than 2022. That was the peak year, but look, that is no comfort when you still have these small boat crossings where we've got lives being put at risk and huge numbers of lives being lost, and also these criminal gangs are profiting from the undermining our border security.
And the numbers have gone up during your time in charge. So I'm aware, we're coming up to the 6-month milestone.
But the numbers, compared to the first half of the year, we had record highs. We haven't had that record high level. That could have taken us potentially up to 50,000 crossings this year. We haven't had that, but let's be clear, the scale of the boat crossings that we're seeing is deeply damaging, undermines border security and puts lives at risk.
I suppose the question, though, that our viewers watching and listening to you today have, though, is when will they see a difference? People see the numbers continuing to go up. People see more hotels being used to house people without permission in their towns. People arrive without support. That can have a very detrimental effect on them as individuals. You've said to yourself before, that doesn't work for anyone. So when can people expect to see a difference? When can you expect to see the numbers of small boats coming down if your approach is the right one?
Just briefly on the asylum hotels, and then we come back to the border security issue. The last few months before the election, and we were not aware of the scale of what the government was doing, they had just effectively crashed the asylum system. So asylum decisions dropped by around 70%, asylum interviews dropped by around 80%. So that meant in July we had then suddenly a soaring backlog, a whole series of cases stacked up. We've had to manage that through the summer. That's had an impact on asylum accommodation, but we do now have the asylum decisions are back up to where they were. We do now have the asylum backlog coming down, because we're clear we need to be taking people out of asylum hotels. We need to be clearing that backlog and ending the use of asylum hotels, and also saving hundreds of millions of pounds, if not billions of pounds, for the taxpayer.
But you've been opening more.
So, well, that's the result of the what we've inherited with the collapse in decision making. So it is really important we've now got the backlog coming down, because that is part of just restoring order to the system rather than the chaos that we had. Come back to the issue around the border security. What's been interesting in Italy is they have worked on prevention. They have worked with other countries. They've worked with countries across North Africa. They have seen, as a result of the work they've done, a more than 50% reduction in Mediterranean boat crossings. And they've been clear that you need to combine strong law enforcement and prevention work as well. But the one thing you will hear the Italian Prime Minister say repeatedly is, no country can do this alone. We have to work together.
You give there the example that Italy, who's been able to cut their number of arrivals significantly by working more with other countries. But I do think the question that people want to know is, when will they see a difference? And, you know, this government now seems to be fond of giving us timelines and targets and milestones, or whatever you want to call them. So when can people expect to see a difference, to see the number of boats crossing coming down, to see the number of asylum hotels coming down too?
Well, we're already reducing the backlog. So we are already on the asylum backlog.
That's a different question.
So go back to the boat. So on the asylum backlog and the hotel use, we are already making progress, and we are already bringing the backlog down. And so we expect to continue to make progress on that through the winter.
But
on
to
the boat
be clear, also with
crossings,
people, reducing the backlog also means allowing more people to stay. And those people also will need housing, they'll need health, they'll need jobs.
well, it also means increasing returns. And one of the biggest changes that we have seen since the election is we moved people who were working on the failing Rwanda scheme that had sent 4 volunteers to Kigali. They had 1,000 people working on that scheme, that completely failed scheme. We have moved people in. We've actually moved around 1,000 people into returns and enforcement. And as a result of that, we're now on track for over 13,000 removals, returns since the election, a big increase in returns, and also a big increase in the raids on illegal working, a big increase on arrests and enforcement, because the rules have to be respected and enforced. They just haven't been for far too long.
But I will ask you again, when can our viewers expect to see the number of people making small boat crossings, putting their lives at risk trying to get to the UK? When can they expect that to come down?
So of course we want to continue to see progress. Of course we want to see the boat crossings come down as rapidly as possible. What we're not going to do is deal this by slogans. So, you know,
It's not about slogans. But Home Secretary, this is not about slogans. When it comes to something like waiting lists and in the NHS, the government's very happy to put targets publicly on that and say, measure us by whether we hit those. When it comes to kids' education, the government's been very happy to put a target on that, saying, judge us by this measure. When it comes to this issue, you won't give us a yardstick by when we could know when people can actually expect there'll be a significant difference. Why not? Because it makes it feel like it's not a priority to the government in the way that some other issues are.
Well, quite the opposite. We've made clear that the border security is actually one of the foundational issues before you even get to any of the missions. It's one of the big foundations, and we've been clear we need to reduce both legal migration and illegal migration, that we need to be, the clear priority for the government in terms of tackling these dangerous boat crossings. there is a history of Home Secretaries and Prime Ministers making grand promises but never actually having a proper plan. The approach we're taking to this is really step by step. We are putting in place the things that we need, the agreements with other countries, the stronger returns arrangements, the much stronger law enforcement, the operations with Germany to go after the smugglers, supply chains, the operations with Italy to go after the illicit finance.
But you're asking people to be patient then with the existing situation.
Well, I think we're being very clear and straight with people about the complexity of this, because the gimmicks did not work. What we had previously was a whole load of gimmicks. Everybody promised it was going to solve it immediately, and what we're doing is the very serious action. We've already substantially increased. We've had over 25% increase in terms of the returns. We're having over 30% increase in enforcement raids. So we're already increasing step by step. But of course, this is complex, and of course, this takes time.
What you don't call gimmicks, other people call strong deterrence.
Yeah,
now,
we
know that you ditched the Conservatives' Rwanda plan, and frankly, our viewers know no one can tell whether it worked or not because it didn't happen. Conservatives say it would have had an effect. You say it was a disaster and it never would have done it.
It ran for
We
2.5 years.
But we will never know.
2.5 years, £700 million.
But we will never
and
know.
4 volunteers.
But I want to ask you.
I mean, that is just a total failing scheme.
But we'll never know because it didn't happen. However, you said on our programme a while ago that you were interested in the idea of using another country maybe for processing claims. Italy, where we're speaking today, has started, not with huge success, but to use Albania to process people. Are you still in principle open to the idea of using other countries as sites where people who want to live in the UK could have their claims looked at and processed, to use the jargon? Are you still interested in that?
So we will look at whatever works. Clearly, everything has to meet proper international standards. Clearly, something has to be effective and has to deliver results. The interesting thing about the Italy-Albania arrangement, and you're right, that hasn't fully started yet. The interesting thing about that is that at the heart of it is a plan to effectively fast-track cases from predominantly safe countries. We are interested in doing that in the UK, is to fast-track decisions for people arriving from countries that are predominantly safe, where we should be able to take those decisions very swiftly and also be able to return people very swiftly. That hasn't happened in the past, so we are interested to develop that in the UK. We think that's an important principle.
But potentially you might still be interested in looking at other countries for processing.
We will look at whatever works. But I think the key thing is to be just really practical, and that's why we've been focusing on the law enforcement, on being able to take out some of the criminal gangs, but also to be able to fast-track those decisions and returns.
On the flip side, though, if you speak to refugee groups or someone like your old colleague, David Miliband, they would say, actually, this is about a historic movement of peoples desperate for a better life. And the only way to deal with this properly is to open up more safe routes where people can come more easily to the UK or other Western countries. But you won't look at that. Why not?
Well, we have always had different kinds of safe ways for resettlement and for support for refugees. That will always continue to be the case, because whether that be around Ukraine, whether that be around the work that we have done on Afghanistan, whether that be on Hong Kong, all of that's important. So all countries should do their bit to help those who have fled persecution and conflict. But whatever you do on that side, unless you go after the criminal gangs, then this kind of smuggling and trafficking will continue, because the gangs have a criminal industry. They will just advertise for more places. So therefore, that's why I think you've got to go after the criminal gangs.
One of your own ministers said it was like whack-a-mole. You know, you take out a gang somewhere and they pop up somewhere else. So are you really confident that law enforcement alone and returns is going to actually solve this problem in an effective way and make a big difference? Because you've got critics on the left and right who say what you're putting forward, fine, that's what everybody would want to do. You want to enforce the law, you want to work with other countries, but what you're putting forward is not radical enough to tackle a problem of this scale.
Well, if you go back six years or so, there were barely any boat crossings across the Channel. Since then, an entire criminal industry has grown up along our border, organising these boats. bringing in these flimsy plastic boats from China or Turkey or across the continent, supplying the engines, huge financial money networks that they use in order to take the payments for it. This is a criminal industry. They've got advertising online, on TikTok, on Facebook, and so on. That criminal industry has grown up in the space of 6 years and been allowed to take hold. We should not be allowing those gangs to get away with it. And that's why I do think very strongly it is right to be going after those criminal gangs, not to just shrug our shoulders and say, oh well, the criminal organised smuggler gangs will always be with us and therefore we should do nothing. We have a responsibility, a moral responsibility, to go after those gangs who are putting lives at risk. When you see these flimsy boats, the way that it's women and kids who get put in the middle of the boat, so when the boat falls, they are the people who get crushed, who end up drowning. This incredibly dangerous boats in the Channel, and it undermines our border security. So I do believe we have to go after the criminal gangs. You'll hear the Prime Minister Keir Starmer will talk about the work that he did when he was the Director of Public Prosecutions to go after the terrorist
and
gangs.
I don't think there's a single person watching who would think that you should just let the gangs do this. But do you really think that you can end that trade once and for all?
So I do believe that you can tackle this trade of organised gangs, and partly because what I've seen through, the talking to other countries, the work that we've done looking at France, Germany, the visit to Iraq as well, actually I think our law enforcement across borders has been far, far too weak. You can see all kinds of different areas where we could be operating much more strongly between us.
Just one final question, if I may, because it's the first time we've spoken to you since the election, and you're one of the few government ministers who's gone back into government. You'd done it before. I think it's fair to say it's been quite a bumpy time. Would it have been better if more of your colleagues had had experience in government like you?
If you're asking me, would it have been better if we hadn't had 14 years in opposition, then yes, I strongly agree with you, and then more people would have had recent experience, because 14 years of opposition, has been a tough period. But what it also means, though, is I do think we have inherited actually is a much more difficult situation than in 97 when I was first elected. A lot of damage had been done in 97, but that is nothing compared to really the damage, the chaos really throughout the system, damage to the economy, to the public finances, the scale of damage to the public finances and to our public services. We've seen it in policing, but the NHS, I see in my own constituency the huge damage to the NHS. That is a challenge to deal with that. That leads to much more serious challenges than I think we faced last time round. But that's why I think we've been so determined to move at such pace over the last 6 months.
Yvette, thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Thanks, Laura.